Who remembers Project Altered Beast? So, Sega made some announcements recently. Like a great ancient titan, they've woken from their long slumber and realised they have a back catalogue. One down, the entire rest of the industry to go, I guess. We got announcements for Crazy Taxi, Jet Set Radio, Golden Axe, Shinobi and Streets of Rage. And they don't just look like remakes from classic titles, thank God. But we also got an and more tease. Ooh, mysterious. Only not really, because everyone saw the new trademarks, including the beloved classic Altered Beast. And this is genuinely exciting for fans. I've even got a little glimmer in my eyes. But then, how many people remember that they tried rebooting some of their franchises before? Because they did. And it didn't go particularly well. But the one we're going to talk about today specifically is Project Altered Beast, a gritty 2005 reimagining of the original 1988 title. Now, some of you probably don't remember this game because it never released in the US. Why? Poor critical reception and poor sales. Why? Well, stick around as I catalogue the highs, the lows, and the slow demolition of my sanity that is Project Altered Beast. Just a quick warning before we start, but this game has some pretty nasty body horror in it. I have tried to avoid showing it as much as possible, however there will be a section in the video that I will be talking about it, but I'll let you know when that's happening. As you can guess, this game starts with setting the scene. Forest City, or town as it's called every other time it's mentioned, has been quarantined because of some weird, definitely not toxic mist that's covering the place, and there is a helicopter flying over the mist carrying a box, which is basically all you're getting for now. Obviously, this being a video game, that helicopter gets attacked and crashes and the box turns out to not be pizza, but in fact a man. Meet Luke Custer, the main protagonist and all-around non-character. No, seriously, there is nothing noteworthy about him other than that he has amnesia for reasons. However, what follows is arguably one of the most cathartic opening encounters I've ever played. You transform into a fully upgraded werewolf form and are given carte blanche to just go to town on a bunch of enemies. Other than being genuinely fun to tear through enemies, it's just a great way to get players invested into the game, showing them what they could do when maxed out, and I wish games didn't stop doing it. But after you beat this guy specifically, you fall over because the wolf brain is taking over or something, and this mysterious woman that knows an awful lot about you saves you from going full furry. She will probably be important later, maybe. Anyway, you are now introduced to the main mechanics of the game. You can transform into various beast forms at will, but doing so will cost spirit, this green bar here. If you run out while in beast form, it will slowly drain your health instead. Gaining more spirit can be done by simply defeating enemies or sucking it out of them by punching them in the groin and squeezing. This will almost always yield more spirit, but it's a lot riskier because human form is made out of wet tissue paper. There are also some red enemies that are guaranteed to drop health, but they really aren't that many, so it's barely worth mentioning. Anyway, drain some weak mobs, turn into a wolf and hop the wall into Area 1, where you are properly introduced to gatekeepers. The enemies with powerful aura are gatekeepers, enemies that for some reason create an impassable barrier that you have to defeat to progress. You'll want to get used to this because this is legitimately the only way to get through the game 90% of the time. They are stronger than standard enemies, but beating them will net you genome points, which you can use to augment your beast forms. Speaking of, let's talk about werewolf and leveling in general. Wolf is a fast fighter, probably the fastest of the forms you get during the main game, with the best combo options, but also very squishy if you don't keep moving. His special attack is Berserker Rage, where you dash forward in a direction, dealing damage to anything in your path, even those that are blocking. Pretty no frills in the grand scheme of things, but fun nonetheless. Leveling is also pretty straightforward. You'll use the genome points from the gatekeepers to unlock new moves in the combo, with more powerful moves typically costing more. Nothing much else to say for now. You get through areas 1 and 2 when we are met with our first boss, Leviathan, this big dumb rat fish thing. The boss has 3 health bars and therefore 3 phases. Phase 1, it will sit at the back of the pool of water shooting bones and stuff at you, unless you're really close to the shore, where it will dive out of the water to attack you. Dodge it, hit it with Berserker Rage from the side to flip it on its back, and you can just wail on it for a little bit longer, dealing a lot of damage. Phase 2 is exactly the same, only now the bone attacks has the added benefit of tanking your frame rate. Phase 3, however, it will dive onto the land and start chasing you around. Avoid it for a while and it will get tired letting you attack. Repeat until dead. You'll also notice the area is filled with ads. This is because there is no way to regain spirit from the boss alone, so you have to kill the rats. They aren't super annoying or hard to deal with, but it's kind of weird that most of the boss fights in the game are like this, considering some of the late game ones, but we'll get to that. Defeating Leviathan grants you the genome chip for the merman and a quick flashback explaining that you're here to find and rescue Eric Jobs, and that you're the only one that can survive in the genome mist. What's the genome mist? Who's Eric Jobs? Tune in into the next flashback to find out. Maybe. I'm not going to bore you with progression commentary unless it's really worth mentioning, because it is just following a straight line of go through an area, defeat the boss, unlock new ability, use it to go to the next area and defeat the next boss. There is nothing particularly interesting in it at all. But elephant in the room, the merman form. This is a water level form and it's every bit as bad as it sounds. It shoots bubbles and handles with all the grace of a soggy brick. Its special move is Decoy, which distracts all enemies in an area around it. The bubbles also have tracking, but it is the most temperamental thing ever. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There's no rhyme or reason as to why, you just have to start praying. Travelling through Area 3 and into the next boss, Sarco Sutures. There is nothing really to say about Sarco. Attack it while it isn't electrified, dodge its attacks and you win, which nets you the Wolf Learning Chip. The Learning Chip is separate from the Genome Points as it unlocks a new tool in your form's arsenal, more often used to unlock new areas, but powerful regardless. The Wolf's Learning Chip unlocks a super jump that lets you reach previously inaccessible areas. It's not great honestly and is only used a grand total of 3 times in the entire game for reasons that will become apparent in due time. As we go through Area 4 Swamp, I want to talk about the hell that is the Merman tax. The Merman form is primarily for traversal, however you absolutely need to upgrade its combo because there are bosses and several encounters that are required for 100% completion that are nearly unbearable if you do not have any points put into it. Trust me, this is from experience. The next boss up is Sasquatch, a weird toad gorilla. First phase is just blasting him with bubbles until he goes down. It will shoot ice blasts at you, but it can be dodged by just listing lazily to the left. This boss is also a bit different because it is one of the only 2 bosses in the game where the arena changes. Phase 2, it is a case of lining up with its shadow and using the wolf's super jump to deal damage. Phase 3 is just the classic slapdown fest. Dodge the attacks, hit the boss. This rewards you with the Wendigo form in the next flashback. It turns out Eric Jobs is a scientist that turns you into a genome cyborg, a super soldier capable of transforming into various beast forms. It's shocking, I know, take a moment to process this astounding revelation. Anyway, the Wendigo form. The Wendigo form is honestly a powerhouse. He hits very hard, has huge swings that can tear through groups of enemies without a problem. He can also grab objects and throw them at enemies, or just grab most basic enemies and slam them into the ground. His special ability is Ice Breath, which freezes enemies, either outright killing them or making them able to be one hit. However, this is all with the caveat that the Wendigo is bloody massive. This is a problem because the game handles hit stun really weirdly. From what I can understand, being hit multiple times in a short enough time frame will cause you to get launched, breaking you out and stopping you from being perma-stunned. But because the Wendigo is bloody massive, the following will likely occur. 1. You'll get caught on the enemy dog pile, meaning he doesn't get launched to safety. And 2. He can be clipped very easily by enemy attacks. This means it is entirely possible for the Wendigo to be tossed around like a ragdoll straight into another stun lock. It's not fun, but he's unfortunately the best damage form you'll get for a while. Blitz through Area 5 and the next boss is Ashma, the big baby thing. Conceptually not a hard boss, you just have to throw cars at it until it dies, but the issue comes from the fact that Ashma will also throw cars, but is faster with a longer range. And this can seriously drag the fight down, but beating them grants you the Wendigo Learning Chip, which lets you create ice balls that you can throw at will. So an easier way to fight the boss you just beat. Pretty sure the game is mocking me. Now I want to talk about Area 6 in a little bit more depth because it has a special place in my heart, right next to all of my bubbling hatred. Firstly, getting into Area 6. See, it's blocked off by gatekeepers, but rather than creating a convenient magic wall, they're just vomiting off the roof. And you have to throw ice balls at them, which requires you to turn into Wolf, jump onto the bus, turn into Wendigo, and awkwardly line yourself up to hit them with the ice ball, which is painfully precise and risks you walking off the edge again. Not a good start, but don't worry, it gets worse. See, Area 6 is one of the smallest main areas in the game, but arguably one of the longest. You'll have to go into each open room on the floor you're on and take out the gatekeepers to open the way to the next floor. You have to do this for 3 floors of enemies, with the only reliable way to heal on normal difficulty being to leave the area, go to Aishma's save point and come back. I know I was not optimal in this area, but it took me 50 minutes to get to the boss, which, considering it took me 2 hours to clear everything up to this point, should be all I need to say. But the Citri boss fight is up next. Remember Citri? It blew up the helicopter at the start of the game. Anyway, the boss fight sucks. Not the first phase, mind you, that's actually pretty good. But the second phase is where the background villain reveals themselves to the audience. The camera. The issue is one of depth perception. Because of how far the camera is pulled back to track Citri as it flies around, it is very difficult to actually tell where you are in respect to them, meaning it is very difficult to avoid their attacks, and there are a lot of attacks. Citri is relentless, and you only really have a chance to knock him out of the air with an ice ball when it goes in for a massive flyby. Otherwise, you just do not have the time. It is very RNG heavy and took 45 minutes to beat, and is solidly ranked as my second least favourite fight of them all. Beat them and you get the Garuda chip and another flashback which explains what the genome mist is and how only genome cyborgs can survive in it, and here is my main issue with the plot. There isn't one. You've just been plopped down and told to go through each area. All the flashbacks are world building, and while it's good world building, you're not given much motivation other than just progress, stupid. We're at the midpoint of the game, at least give me something. The original game gave me more steer than this, and that was literally just, yo, save my daughter. But now we have the Garuda, the second of the 2 traversal forms, and legitimately the form you'll be using the most for the rest of the game because it is the fastest base game form. It also lets you travel to Area 7, which is kind of a fast travel nexus thing at any time from areas 1 to 6 just by flying up. Regular attack shoots a burst of feathers while stationary and as fast as you can press the button while flying. His special is Tornado, which is actually a massive trap and will get you killed because it locks you in place, and this form can still be hit when it's launched, which is of course extremely fun. And much like the Merman, you have to pay the upgrade tax because Garuda is needed for 4 of the next 8 bosses, but luckily, as you can use him anywhere, he becomes an absolute powerhouse if lock-on works properly because you have the same issue as the Merman's bubbles. But he also comes with a caveat that it more or less completely invalidates the werewolf for everything but 3 bosses for the rest of the game, which is pretty unfortunate really. But now we have the ability to fly and backtrack to previous areas to get to places that were previously inaccessible because we didn't have the forms required. It makes sense to wait until you have all the forms before you do this. However, you probably should do everything you can now, just because you want to level up your forms a bit. But what fun things await us? Well, I'm glad you asked, because not a lot, honestly. The first thing you'll probably have noticed are these double helices dotted around the map or randomly dropping out of enemies. This is enemy data. There are 87 in total, most of which you can gain from defeating specific enemies in specific areas, as noted on the enemy data screen, or just in random spots in the overworld, which wouldn't be so annoying if it weren't for the fact that they are just in the middle of nowhere with no rhyme or reason to be there. So much so that it is basically strategy guide bait, except no strategy guide exists and you're on your own. Thank God for the internet, because getting 100%, which I do not recommend in any capacity by the way, would be bloody impossible otherwise. That said, enemy data itself is actually pretty interesting to read, but I strongly suggest not playing the enemy data drinking game, where you take a drink every time an entry says may be due to the differences in density of the genome mist, because you will literally die. Onto the previously accessible areas though. A lot of them just have gatekeepers in a cave. Not the most exciting, but a good way to rack up genome points to level up. But there are also the uniques. The uniques are 25 weird-ass bird things that spawn in hard-to-reach areas of the world or in previously cleared boss arenas. When they spawn, you have a minute to defeat them before they disappear, and you have to reload the area again. Defeating one in the boss arenas will give you a hefty chunk of genome points, but the out of the way ones, they drop N and S chips, which are the real money makers. The N chips increase your basic attacks by a pretty decent amount, while the S chips change the functionality of your special move substantially. Tornado can now be moved while active, your breath attacks travel further and can be turned much more. Werewolf becomes Superman for a few seconds. But the uniques all have their own strengths and weaknesses and their own special ways to be taken out. So how do you do it? Well, there's the correct way of dealing with them, then there's the actual way you deal with them, which entails going Wendigo and just chain slamming them into the ground. And aside for the 4 that literally have only one way to be defeated and all the underwater and area ones, 12 of them can just be unga-bungered into the dirt. But otherwise there really isn't a lot to do. It's just more combat encounters, which is a bit disappointing if I'm honest. I was hoping for a puzzle or something, but no. More combat. So much more combat. But anyway, next up is Xenethus, the token giant enemy spider of the game, and another boss that doesn't have much going for it really. All you have to do is shoot it once so it jump attacks you, dodge, and then shoot its massive weak point while it climbs back up. With the correct upgrades and a good amount of luck, it is entirely possible to one-cycle this boss. Beating it will net you the Garuda learning chip, which allows you to dive through a grand total of 2 barriers in the entire game. And annoyingly, it barely works because the camera is constantly fighting you. This isn't me, by the way, this is just what it does. But now we're at the checkpoint and we finally get some direction outside of the number go up. Anastasia tells you that Brad, another genome cyborg, you saw him in this pro-raid cutscene here by the way, released the genome mist to steal the most powerful genome chip to do something. Like most of the game's story, it's not expanded on at all. She also reveals Luke is a genome cyborg, 2 hours after the game already tells you. Luke looks surprised though. Mate, you've just seen an exponential flashback, you know this. But other than this weird little info dump, this is where I fear the game really dives in quality. You'd think that wouldn't be far, considering how I've been describing things so far, but trust me, we've seen nothing yet. Area 9 is the mines, and possibly the worst area in the game behind 6. Not because it's long, but because the enemies are just awful. Some of them do contact damage to you and will launch you, some of them will just straight up launch you, and others will dive underground, becoming untargetable, wasting your spirit gauge. It's just not a fun time. And the boss isn't much better, but mostly because it's kind of broken and also it's a water boss. The final water boss, thankfully. Caliicthis, like Sarko, will become untargetable after being hit, but this time it's when it's electrified that you can hit it, which is kinda confusing. But everything is mostly fine until phase 2, where nothing is. Homing lightning that is hard to dodge, lightning waves that are hard to dodge, lightning balls that have a broken hitbox so it's hard to dodge, and a charge attack that hits multiple times that is impossible to dodge. It's not fun. It is in fact the exact opposite. But beating it gives you the Merman learning chip, which gives you depth charge, a charged bubble bomb that is used to blast through these weird flesh walls, and while it's best not to think about that honestly, it's actually a powerful AoE attack that can be used against enemies, which is nice. After the hell that is in Area 9, we have Area 10, a lovely rustic cave with a beautiful rolling boulder feature. I'm taking the piss, but this is literally the most interactive an area has ever been. Too bad it's very short, but that just means we get to the boss sooner. It's Balrog. No, not that one. Or that one. This one. A giant flaming bat and one of the few truly multi-stage bosses in the game. It's also still a bit rough, mainly in the Garuda sections. Balrog is hanging from the ceilings and you have to shoot it in the torso with your feathers, all while it's blasting fire at you. And because it gets the best damage for you having to be stationary, you have to awkwardly circle the boss to avoid taking damage while you attack. That's not too bad, but if you get low on health or spirit, you have to drop to the floor and take out the small bats to restore them. However, Balrog can still attack you, and because of the camera, you cannot see the attacks coming. Not great, but it's still only just 2 health bars. Luckily, phase 2 is the werewolf forms. Sadly, one of the last uses in the entire game though. Balrog will start hopping at you and try to charge you. Similar to the Leviathan at the start of the game, you just have to avoid this for a few seconds before you can attack the head for massive damage. Phase 3 is easier still. You switch to the Wendigo and just chuck ice balls up as it flies over you. Thankfully the camera isn't too bad for this fight, so I didn't have to pull my hair out. Ironically, I used to loathe this boss, but after I figured out how you're supposed to do it in the second playthrough, I actually kinda have to say it's one of the best. In defeating Balrog, we are given a new form and a new flashback, and this one has to be the worst one because it adds literally nothing. Brad takes the genome chips, and Brad and Luke have an awkward fight, and Brad beats Luke and walks off. I think this is supposed to throw suspicion at Brad or assumed motives for being overlooked, but it lacks any context and is just a throwaway moment. But we get the Minotaur out of it, which is neat. Another beefy boy like the Wendigo, pun not intended by the way, but only smaller and also more durable because on top of his basic attacks, the Minotaur can turn his body into metal, making enemy attacks plink off. It also lets you fall through the ground in this one particular spot. This is never explained and is only ever used in this one instance. It's all very weird. His special attack is Flame Breath, just like the Wendigo's Ice Breath, only fire. And it lets you destroy these two oil tankers, and I hope you've noticed the pattern here. The main downside is attacks are very slow and awkward to aim and use in large encounters, so he will get thrown around like a ragdoll. But we can now enter Area 11, and once again there isn't much going on, so let's talk about another major issue with the game. It's combat. Now, in the early game, it's actually kind of fun. You get to play around with the combos a bit and all very neat, but the later it gets, the more the game design dissuades you from using most of your moves. There are more enemies in basically every encounter. More of those enemies can also block. Enemies will attack in weird patterns and knock you out of your longer combos. Hell, Wendigo does so much knockback it basically can't combo into any of its grab attacks. This is also compounded by the amount of hit stun some of these enemies can lock you into, because sometimes the internal timer doesn't work properly for some reason or another, so you're relegated to using short anti-block combos or relying on special attacks to clear encounters. It's disappointing at best and entirely frustrating at worst. There isn't actually a boss in Area 11, but Area 12 starts with one instead. Meet Osei, the giant nuclear panther thing, and honestly one of the coolest looking bosses in the game. However, the fight is a bit meh. You're supposed to bait it into slamming the ground so you can gore it out of the air for more damage. But like a lot of bosses, it's extremely RNG reliant and will sometimes just not do the move. So the best option is hilariously to go Garuda and pepper Osei with feathers while tanking the breath that will probably only hit you once at a time. Second phase, however, Osei will dart around the room and occasionally charge directly at you, which is where you turn to Iron as the Minotaur to stun them to deal more damage. However, sometimes it doesn't work properly and Osei will just miss or blast through your armor entirely. But you beat them and you get the Minotaur's learning chip, Bull Rush. This allows you to smash through some of the destructible walls in the game and charge through these moving piston corridors. However, I did not do this. I did something exponentially dumber. That's on me. I chalk one up for the game here. Good lord, it needs it. Okay, so it turns out I was actually wrong and you are supposed to just block your way up the corridor. Honestly, the charging thing would have made more sense, but at this point, this game is, yeah. Area 12 as a whole is probably the longest in the game, primarily because it requires you to take a detour to clear the way to the boss, which is fine, but I am thoroughly combated out at this point. But there's a small puzzle as a treat, which I honestly really needed, but it just makes me wish there was more. It takes a bit, but we finally get to fight Brad, the were-tiger. Now this fight is interesting because there are no ads in here at all. The only way to regain spirit and health is from these things dropping from the ceiling. Unfortunately, if you were expecting a Dante versus Virgil style slobber knocker, you're about to be very disappointed. Also, yeah, this game released around the same time as DMC3, and I only just noticed this while writing this section. Jesus Christ. Anyway, it's a bit awkward to fight him because unlike every other boss, he doesn't have any readable weak points or openings. He will dodge all of your attacks, including your specials, when he's neutral, and as far as I can tell, the most reliable way to attack him is when he's attacking you or he's just finished attacking, which isn't great because his behaviour otherwise just feels super random. In phase 2, he will climb up this pillar and pepper you with wind blades, and you have to bull rush to knock him down. The absolutely annoying thing is that you have to do this 3 times, and to guarantee doing it safely, you have to run to the opposite side of the room, start the charge behind the other pillar, and this just feels like unnecessary padding. And phase 3? It's just phase 1, but he's more likely to just drop kick you. Very disappointing for the token rival character. Beating him lands you with this cutscene and the shakiest camera work I've seen, where Brad calls Luke an idiot, tells him to stop Anastasia, refuses to elaborate, and then leaves. Afterwards, we get the last form for the run and the final flashback, where you discover that Anna was a genome cyborg all along, which would have been a shocking revelation if it's not for the fact that we already know nothing but a genome cyborg can survive in the mist. It's kind of daft how little faith this game has in people following its already meagre story, but it has yet to give you even an inkling as to why any of this is happening. But from this abomination we get the dragon form, the ultimate beast of destruction. It plays kinda like the Garuda, except slower, but with a meaner punch. You shoot lightning balls that can kill basically any enemy in one hit. They can also be held indefinitely and will always home no matter where you are so long as there is something in range. The only downside being the balls have this wild curved arc to them, and using them in a corridor is basically impossible. Its special move is Arc Lightning, where you let out a massive blast of electrical energy that is even more devastating than its basic attack. And since I'm here at the final form, can I just gush about these things? While the combat sucks, gets extremely tedious, these forms are so beautifully done. They are all visually distinct, they have their own unique playstyles, even if some of them share very similar mechanics, and just listen to their themes. And even the transformations are amazing. People that have an aversion to body horror or are just squeamish or all around, please skip to the time showing on the screen here. Everyone else, just look at this. This is where the budget went, and I just wish the rest of the game had the same care and attention put into it. Though saying that, I do love the overall aesthetic of the game. It's gritty, it's grime, and it's trying way too hard, but I kind of yearn for this era of games' sheer unbridled nonsense. Hell, the manual has the line, "Is there a future for mankind who have violated God's providence?" That is the rawest goddamn line, and it has bugger all bearing on the actual game. I mean, what? What? Now that we have the final form and all the learning chips, it is now the perfect time to farm up some uniques and genome chips to eke out those last amounts of power for your forms before you can get to the final stretch. At this point, most everything should be no hassle to deal with, except for that one unique in Area 3. Screw this guy in particular. Once again, not much going on in Area 13. It's a linear corridor, but at least it introduces my favourite enemy, the Sliding Horseman. I genuinely love these guys. Then into Area 14, and what's this I see? A door locked not with a mist wall, but 4 buttons? Holy moly, actual variance. So you go all around the 4 corners of the map, smash the consoles because it's all Luke knows, and it's been working out pretty well for him so far, which opens the door to the boss fight. But before we do, I want to show you this super evil looking barrier for one special reason. This. A powerful energy field enables you to get any closer. I need you to consider something for a moment. My first time playing this game was awful. It showed its age and was falling apart at the seams, and the only thing keeping me going was my then complete inability to drop any game. So seeing this poorly translated mess completely broke me. Honestly snapped what little sanity I had left. Anyway, the boss downstairs is the Basilisk. You know the uniques? Well, meet the mother. Not a lot going on in this fight, a level dragon will just shred it, but special consideration should be given for the jump attack, and that in the second phase it will spawn and eat the babies to heal. Gruesome. Defeating Basilisk will give you a learning chip, just not the dragons though, just an unknown chip for later. Area 15 is literally just a corridor, with a side room containing unique with no timer that cannot be attacked. How weird. At the end of the corridor we have to face the penultimate boss of the main game, the Rhinorian, a 15 feet tall, 3.8 metric ton rhino man designed specifically to wreck your ass. Wait, no, another solo boss, but unlike Brad, Spirit doesn't spawn for free in this arena, and you just have to fist fight this behemoth. The problem is it blocks most attacks, can throw ice and fire moves at will, and is borderline immune to most elemental moves. You're kind of required to use the Minotaur form to hit him when you can, which isn't very often, so you'll probably end up burning through all your spirit before the first health bar is down. However, this is where the interesting gimmick of this fight comes in. You see, the Rhinorian will not attack you if you're in human form, and will return to the center of the arena to meditate and heal. Not sure about the lore implications here, but this will let you hit him with your drain attack and spirit spawn. You only get to do this twice before he gets up again, and if you're too close when he does, you'll probably die to his weird AoE blast from the elemental attacks. Phase 2 is more of the same, except he now has a supercharge move that I think is unblockable, but I have never stood in front of it to test this out because I'm not actually daft. You may have noted that this fight sounds like a slog, and it is, if you follow the online guides. What you're actually supposed to do is to bait out his body slam move and then gore attack him mid-air, opening him up for more damage. I am also 90% sure you can juggle it as well, because I swear that's how I did it when I originally played it, but that was maybe a decade ago and I was half insane at the time. For beating him, you get the Dragon Learning Chip for the Thunder Cannon, a modified charge version of your special move that fires a massive laser that is actually weaker than your normal special in all encounters except the final boss, which is the only thing that's left. Laser the poorly translated door and in we go. Anastasia, having changed into her villain dress, explains the reason why she released the genome mist. See, Dr. Jobs lost interest in her and Brad when Luke was created, and Anna took that very badly. So her plan was to have Luke be deployed, use the dragon chip, and then absorb Luke's DNA to also take the dragon form so that Jobs would care about her existence again. She then absorbs Jobs anyway, making this whole thing pointless, and also never explains why Luke has amnesia. He just does. Anyway, phase 1 is just Anna throwing giant heads at you, and all you have to do is blast her with the fully charged Thunder Cannon. This throws you into a cutscene where she begins absorbing Luke, but then Brad comes along and cuts you out, leaving a nice massive weak point on Anna because she was functionally immortal before. Brad then stands there like a prat for 10 seconds before getting grabbed and thrown into a wall, which kills him apparently. Yet the inconsistencies are occurring again. But here we get into the fight proper. My friends, it is not lightly that I say that this fight is not only the worst boss fight in the entire game, but the absolute epitome of everything wrong with this game's combat. Each phase needs to be fought in a specific form: Wendigo, Minotaur, Garuda, Werewolf, and finally Dragon. Now, what you're supposed to do is hit Anna's torso where Brad slashed her to deal damage. Hitting her 3 times will cause her to stagger, releasing spirit and health to keep you topped up during the fight. Which sounds nice, but in practice this is the worst thing ever. Because of how the camera is positioned, it is hard to tell if you're close enough to hit her. Because of RNG, she can randomly repeat moves that make her invulnerable, and only 2 moves in her arsenal are safe to attack during or after. Because the game hates combos, if you try to hit her more than 3 times, she is almost guaranteed to boot you across the room. Because the game randomly decides not to play ball, sometimes hitting her 3 times doesn't give you the spirit and health you need. And this is all capstoned in the Garuda phase. You know how I said you need to pay the Garuda tax? This is why. Firstly, she will shoot homing lightning balls after you that are almost impossible to avoid, stagger locking you. She will occasionally do a charge attack, which will randomly chain into a second frame 1 charge attack that has 0 tell whatsoever. But the absolute worst move by a country mile is the tornado move. See, she will move to the center of the room and start channeling an attack. While she is moving is the only time it is safe to attack her, because she becomes invulnerable during the charge up. After which, she will release 8 tornadoes that all fly in random directions, bouncing off of walls, which is only avoidable by hugging the corners. The problem is that she only moves from the center of the room when she does the charge attack, which means it's entirely possible for her RNG to be in such a way that she will fire the first volley of lightning balls and then immediately start the tornado attack over and over again. And because the invulnerability starts the moment the animation begins, it becomes entirely possible for her to spend the entire phase being completely undamageable. Add to this the fact that the feather lock-on is notably worse in this fight, because it will not target her unless you're on the same Z coordinate, and even if she moves, she can potentially just not be hit. Every time I beat this phase, it's because the stars bloody aligned and I managed to stun lock her as she repeatedly tried to get to the center of the room. This game was made by people that hate you. The werewolf phase isn't as bad, but the only reliable way to damage her is to super jump into her weak point repeatedly, which this camera angle doesn't help with at all. Thankfully, the dragon phase just shoots lightning balls at her until she dies. After an hour of slamming my head against the wall, I managed to get lucky enough to beat her. Then the game just ends. There's no payoff, no grand reward for beating her. Luke just walks off into the night, hopefully never to be seen again. When I said the second half of the game was worse, I really wasn't lying. But at least there's post-game content. But just before we get there, I want to touch on the weirdness that is this game's difficulty modes. You have the classics of enemy damage and health changing as you change difficulties, but the really weird thing is the save points. See, when you touch the save point in easy, you get all your health and spirit back. In normal, you get all your health. In hard, you get all your spirit. I'm not complaining about the game throwing you a bone, but it's so weird that it does it like this. Hard mode also changes which enemies spawn and what enemy data is collected from one of those floating around the world. But there is no additional reward other than admitting you're a masochist in the least direct way possible. Anyway, onto the post-game stuff. It's a little sparse on content, but beating Anastasia opens up the elevator of doom. Kind of like the DMC Bloody Palace, but the Diet Pepsi version. For the first 6 blocks, you are forced to play one of the base forms of the game, and honestly, it's pretty fun. After beating those blocks, you unlock Block G, where you could use any form, but probably the dragon for the swiftness of time and just how fun raining lightning down on enemies is. The final block is shorter, but it also gives you the last boss in the game, Belphegor, a big bug thing with a bare face. Unlike the other bosses, this isn't a case of hit it until it dies. It's a puzzle boss. I am extremely happy about this, and this is probably one of the few times anyone will ever say that. It is immune to all damage, so you have to hit it until it angers and starts rolling at you, go into metal form as the Minotaur so it bounces off and lands on its back, use Wendigo to throw it into the water, and then blast the crap out of it as the merman until it dies. This will unlock the Grizzly, the Kung Fu Master. That isn't a joke, by the way. This form is a martial artist for some reason with the longest combo in the game, which would be nice if you ever got to use it without getting stunned out of it, but hey. You can also curl into a ball to roll through these 2 holes that you have encountered in this game. His special is Earth Breath, which is kind of just the Ice Breath again, but with far more damage. His learning chip, for some reason, lets him fart neurotoxin, which exists only to kill this unique here. Not much else to say. Next up we have the boss time attack, which is just beating the bosses again within the time limit. This has been open since the moment you got Leviathan, but only fills out when you unbeat the bosses the first time in the game. But again, it is best to wait until now because most of these will be super easy with how beefed up your forms have gotten, but some still require a little ingenuity to beat them in really tight times. But thank God Anastasia isn't on this list. Beating all the times unlocks UWH, the Unidentified Weightless Human. This is straight up an alien. He floats, he can control gravity, teleport, and has the ability to insta-kill any enemy in the game with his full combo. No learning chip, but my God does he not need one. It's a real shame he exists for only one reason. Go down to the final elevator of Doom again, and there is Medusa, likely the last unique you will find. It can only be defeated with the full combo of the UWH, which sounds easy, but the timing is awkward and ramps up in speed as you go through it. But it is one of the coolest things in the game. But that's all he's for. He's Project Altered Beast's butter robot.
Oh my God.
Now after all of this, the grinding, the boss rush, the use of online guides to find the random enemy data, you have everything wrapped up. Except for the final boss data, which is Anastasia's boss data. Do you know how you get Anastasia's boss data? You fight her again. This time with even more bugs somehow. Splendid. An hour and a half later, we've got everything, which unlocks the Were-Tiger. You know Brad's form? That makes everything worth it, right? No, the Were-Tiger is extremely disappointing. Instead of a cool transformation, you get a montage of Brad clips that look like they were created in Windows Movie Maker and are only missing some Bullet for My Valentine song. His movement and combos are janky, and they are nowhere near as cathartic as, say, the Dragon or the Minotaur's blast combos. And even worse, you can use it for nothing. You have completed everything already. You can't use it for boss time attack. You can't use it for the Anastasia fight. Not that you should fight her again. There is no New Game Plus, so you basically can only use it for Block G of the elevator. Just why? Now, there is a reason I have been extremely negative about this, and it's not because it's bad. Well, it is, but because I can see the potential just below the surface. It permeates every aspect of the game, but it just doesn't commit to anything enough. The world building is good, but the story is borderline non-existent. The combat is fun, but the oversaturation and the monotony of encounters just kills the enjoyment. The gameplay has neat concepts, but they're all half-baked, poorly implemented, or just straight up don't work. There is great optional or secret content, but it is all locked to the post-game and is used for one or two menial tasks at best. If I were to give this game a rating, it would be a solid, this game was made. I hope you all enjoyed me rambling about a game few people know of and even less care about. I have once again pivoted my content and I am only slightly sorry for that. I have been the Resident Gremlin, and I'll see you next time.